Welcome to Authors Revealed. I'm Becky Anderson. We are so thrilled. We have the founder of the nonprofit To Write Love on Her Arms, Jamie Tworkowski, and his new book, If You Feel Too Much. Jamie, welcome to Naperville and Anderson's. We are so excited you're here.
Thanks for having me.
So, your book, literally out in the world for 12 days, something like that.
Yeah.
So, If You Feel Too Much. So, how does it feel to have this book that you've worked on, I know, almost 10 years with a lot of these writings you have? And how does it feel to have it out in the world? It's sort of like having a baby and introducing it to the world.
Yeah.
But what are you hearing from all the people who support you already and know you? All those different people, what are you hearing?
Everything's been so positive, and it's something I've been wondering about, dreaming about, kind of crying wolf about. So to finally be here and to see photos of people, reading the book, getting the book, it's been so special. And then to see people touched by the writing, and also in a way to see it become new again, because some of this was written, as much as 10 years ago, and to see it kind of alive, taking on a new life now. There was something about having it in that physical form that that I was really excited about.
So you were thinking about writing something else, and then you realized, sort of a epiphany came to you that maybe I should just take all these things I've been writing to people in different ways and putting it together. So where did that seed start to grow to make it into this type of a book?
I think so. Donald Miller is one of my favorite writers and a hero who's also a friend of mine. And he mentioned it, and I remember being a little bit frustrated when he did, because he said, "Hey, maybe your book's already written," and it almost seemed like, oh, well, that's taking the easy way out. But then I started to warm up to two ideas. I think, like, one, I didn't want to go back and rewrite these stories, because they were all these moments that meant a lot to me, and I didn't want to like manipulate them and find a way to tie them all together.
Sure.
I felt like, and the other part was just warming up to the idea the way I write is it tends to be short and poetic, and wondering if these things could just live on their own as a collection.
So going back and thinking about those moments that happened, was it easy? Was it hard to relive some things and then write it out? And you talk about them as being sprints, that you did these writing sprints, and I think that's probably the way a lot of writers are, that you have sprints where these things just flow easily. But what was it like going back and recalling certain things and rewriting them out?
It definitely was a journey, and things I had to different degrees sort of forgotten about, or maybe not thought about or read about in a lot of years, and a lot of it was kind of responding to moments that were difficult or painful, and also I think trying to get back to a place I felt like it was easier for me to be honest at the beginning a bunch of years ago, and so trying to kind of walk through those feelings and that headspace, and in a way trying to tap back into some of that, and wanting all this to kind of have a home in hopes of moving on. So
the title, tell us about the title, If You Feel Too Much. And it's thoughts on things found, lost, and hoped for.
Yeah.
So tell us about the title, because then we'll talk about a lot of this that's, when you started writing a lot of the writings in this book, what you did later hasn't even come to pass yet.
Sure.
So
the title, If You Feel Too Much, came from something I wrote the night that Robin Williams died. And I was actually on my way to a movie theater, where I live in Melbourne, Florida. I was with my dad and my sister on our way to see A Most Wanted Man. And the only reason I was going was because it starred Philip Seymour Hoffman. It was the first film that he starred in that was released after his death. And so I was already in this unique headspace. And my sister, I think, read it on Twitter that Robin Williams had died by suicide. And, all of us were processing it that night. At the same time. And I knew I wanted to write something not about his life, not about his death, not speculating, but wanting to write something for people who could relate to pain, to struggle, to depression, even to the point of thinking about suicide. And it basically starts with that phrase, and that's a phrase I come back to in the writing.
Right. And the thing is, I think what you talk about is, and I've, a lot of people will talk about this too, about people who feel too much, but then there's the reverse side, people who feel too little.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then how do we feel the right amount of way? But how do we, because it's good to feel too much at certain times, right?
Yeah, totally. I think it's an interesting phrase, because I feel like you can kind of finish the sentence, and you can finish it a bunch of different ways.
Sure.
And sort of a starting point is, I'm not trying to be the expert on how much to feel, and certainly, as you said, we're wired differently. But I think it starts with, if you feel too much, it's okay to be honest.
Right.
And if you feel too little, it's okay to be honest. But the whole thing is, like, we all experience pain, loss, grief, difficult seasons, difficult circumstances. what does it look like to be honest, and what does it look like to know that it's okay to get help. And so that's kind of the starting point.
And with the letters, I know it starts off with an email to your mom in the beginning of the book and everything. That collection, was it hard to choose what would go into the book and what wouldn't? I mean, did you find that to be hard to choose and decide? And also channeling yourself, which we mentioned before, what something that's already happened.
The publisher was great, and even specifically the editor gave me a lot of freedom and didn't just let me do what I wanted, but I would run things by her. And it started out as 38 stories, and then it became 40, and in the end it was 44. And so, it meant a lot that they were open to all of this writing kind of existing side by side. And there was the hope, the book's laid out chronologically, so wanting it to be spread out somewhat evenly, so it wasn't a whole bunch from one period, but trying to space it out. And in the end, I'm really happy with it. And so there's nothing I think of, oh, I wish that would have made it, or I wish that would not have made it. I'm really happy with what's in there.
Yeah, and I like the way you started it before, even, you're working for Hurley, but also you started it before your nonprofit, to write love on her arms, that everything that you've done. But I love the quote from Don Miller, and I'd like to read it, that he puts in there, the author, and he says to you and to himself, and I think he's speaking to all of us in a way, be encouraged, your heart is writing a poem on the world and is being turned into 1,000 songs. I thought that was so beautiful. And he wrote this to you and put it in your shoe.
Yeah.
I thought that was so cool.
Totally.
Yeah.
And again, he's one of my favorite writers, probably my favorite living writer, and he's become a dear friend. And I was staying at his house when that happened. And that was I had dreamed of him writing the foreword to my book, and what we ended up using as the foreword it's actually an excerpt from his new book, Scary Close, and it was just so perfect, and several pages of it where it wouldn't have made sense for him to write something new. It was just so good, and I was so honored by it. And then, he was nice enough to say, hey, you're welcome to it.
So, talking about 2006, and we're talking about Renee, a friend of yours, and you're a roommate of hers, and a letter you wrote that went viral. Tell us a little bit about that, what led to the nonprofit that you formed that has been so incredibly influential, and so what an incredible help it has been to so many people. Tell us a little bit about Renee, and for those who don't know about your nonprofit.
So she actually wasn't a roommate. David McKenna was my roommate. Okay,
David was your roommate.
And through David, I met Renee. David's story was one of addiction and recovery, and so he was really our leader. She was denied entry into a local treatment center, spent the next 5 days with us, and David had walked that road, and so he was our leader. And I was there, sort of a fly on the wall, hopefully an encouragement, and halfway through just asked about writing something, and didn't think of myself as a writer. I didn't write for a magazine or a blog. Felt some things moving around in me and wanted to share the story, and wondered if other people could be encouraged by it. And she loved that idea. Certainly none of us, her and I couldn't have dreamed what would come next. And that the film that was released, it really focuses on that same 5 days and that surprising beginning.
Right, and those 5 days, you describe it as a human hospital that you formed around her to help her until you could get her into the rehab facility.
Yeah,
right?
it was all very simple, because sometimes people ask, I don't know, sometimes people make it more than it was, but in a way we tried to keep her safe. We made sure she had, meals, coffee, cigarettes, that she was laughing. We just tried to be with her. It's not like we were creating this treatment center or this state-of-the-art thing. And we just tried, it just was the right thing to do. I mean, sometimes people ask, why did you do that, or how did you know? And it was a need that was in front of us, and it was really a privilege to get to sit with her, and I had never had conversations like that. And it felt important,
And you always talk about honesty, and don't you think that was a reaction that just came from an honest part of who you are, to want to just be with somebody and hear what they have to say and just be there and not create anything that seems artificial.
We were really the bridge, because we were not trying to be the final solution. And my friend David had been through treatment, and so he knew how important that was, and that was the help she really needed and deserved. And we just had to help her pass that time leading up to it. And I think that's important to point out, kind of the role of friends along the way of to professional help, because there's a need for both for so many people.
So the name of your nonprofit is To Write Love on Her Arms. Tell us about that, because she was cutting and hurting herself.
She and I won't even say the word. I don't know what I am allowed to say, but she wrote a word with a razor blade across her forearm, and it was an F word that I think she believed about herself, and I think it was really about identity more than it was about profanity.
Right.
That was who and what she believed to be true about her 19 years on this planet. And to write Love in Arms as a phrase was a goal of believing and hoping she could believe better things, that she could start over and get to a place where that felt possible.
So before you met Renee and David and all that, you grew up in Florida, in Melbourne, Florida, or Melbourne Beach, right? Is it Melbourne Beach or just Melbourne, Florida?
Just over the bridge from Melbourne.
Okay.
Melbourne Beach,
right.
yeah.
So you were a surfer, you grew up, and then you became a rep for Hurley.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that whole experience, and you write about it in the book, which is so interesting how even the one scene he was down in Houston. It was very, very interesting what you write there. So how did that whole experience of doing that and lead to everything else, and how did that inform what you do now?
My dad sold T-shirts growing up, and it's sort of the apple doesn't fall far from the tree, and even now, so I went on to sell clothes, especially T-shirts, and now we're a nonprofit primarily funded by T-shirt sales, so that keeps showing up.
Right.
I don't know, those were amazing doors that opened for me, and that was what I grew up dreaming about, was working. I joke, I was a weird 12-year-old. I mean, literally, if you would have asked me at 12 or 13, what do you want to do? I would have said, I want to be a surf rep. I want to be a sales rep for a surf company. And I got to do that, and then I realized it kind of wasn't a great fit. And I feel like now I'm ultimately doing what I was made to do. And my mom has pointed out this organization and my role, it's sort of everything I've ever learned, liked, cared about under one roof. And I realize how rare that is. But I think what my time at Hurley and Quicksilver before that, it did give me permission to think about brands and what, the idea that this thing could become a brand.
Sure.
And it can be a nonprofit at the same time. But a lot of people thought, oh, this won't last 3 months. It'll be a quick trend and it'll go away. And certainly lots of things do. But I came from a background of brands that stick around, and they expect to be around next year and 10 years from now. Yeah. And I think it gave me permission to think that way. And then, way upstream, I just grew up with parents that were really sensitive, that really loved me, that loved people, that wanted to meet the needs. So I think a lot of it is credit to them.
Yeah. So I want to know, writing these stories out, putting them down, and now that's out, what did it do for you? Was it any kind of a catharsis for you, or what did it do for you personally, do you think?
Yeah, I feel like I'm kind of known for giving all this advice, but the reality is more than half the time I feel like I'm talking to myself, telling people it's okay to be honest, and really believing that honesty is contagious. And I've been pointing out, even on the book tour, I think as people we're made to be known, and I was given this extraordinary opportunity to publish a book and to be known in that way, which most people won't get that chance. But no matter how it plays out, even if it's over a cup of coffee, we're all made to tell stories, to communicate, and so that feels important.
Well, I think stories are so important, and I deal in stories,
Yeah.
but I love a good story, but that's what you want to hear from people. You want to hear their stories, and everyone's stories, as you say, are so important. Yeah.
I have one thing that comes to mind. So Blue Like Jazz was a book that made me want to write, and I feel like the great stories don't just impress you with the story or the characters, but they make you think back on your own story and let you relate and think about your setting and the characters in your real life. And so my hope is Blue Like Jazz did that for me. I hope that this book can do that for some people.
Yeah. So starting this nonprofit, and it's been almost 10 years, or?
Yeah, it'll be 10 years the end of February.
Wow. So what did you learn along the way? I mean, starting off with what you didn't know and what you know now, and would you change anything about that whole journey and the story of that?
Yeah. There were certainly growing pains. There were a lot to learn in terms of not just the issues and the solutions related to these problems, depression, addiction, self-injury, suicide, but just how to run a nonprofit. What does that mean? What's a budget? What's a board of directors? How do you build something that can be sustainable? So there was certainly a lot to navigate. But I think what we've learned in terms of the ideas, like we come back to these simple ideas that people need other people, that it's okay to be honest, it's okay to ask for help, that great help exists. And I think over the years we and even I have gotten better at reducing it to a simple soundbite. Because I think I joke that 10 years ago, it took me 20 minutes to explain to someone, what is this thing? And now I feel like we can really boil it down to this handful of ideas that we believe. We want to be creative in how we continue to communicate them, but it's really these truths that we've found, and it's amazing time and time again to see the light bulb go off for people, where they go, whoa, this doesn't have to be a secret, I can be honest.
That's so incredibly powerful when you think about it. So the vehicles you've used, and this is what I think is so brilliant about what you've done, using music, musicians, concerts, going to college campuses, because that's who we can reach that can really make a difference for so many other people. So how did you evolve into this and getting so many musicians behind you, and what's happening with your organization and what's doing for so many people?
So I joke that so many things that people assume is like a marketing department or a whiteboard filled with strategy were really just these relationships. And so I had friends before the organization started that played in these bands. Some of the first people to wear these t-shirts that we printed to help Renee, they were friends in bands, and they have a unique degree of visibility and influence, and they just were generous with that. They wanted to wear these t-shirts, they wanted to talk about what was happening and invite people into that. So it really wasn't strategic, it just grew out of these friendships. And then the doors started to open, and sometimes they were churches, after that it was college campuses. And so we just kept going back. And I mean, in a really simple way, these are issues that affect people. We want to go where people are. Places like the Warped Tour, certainly online, all these different circles that we get to run in. I have on a soccer jersey because roughly half the girls on the U.S. soccer team have become supporters of ours.
That's so cool.
And it's nothing we could have orchestrated or manipulated. It grew out of a friendship. So we're so thankful. And I think it's healthy to, especially to young people who ask, how do I start something? How do I do something big? To look at the value of small and the value of relationships.
Right. Yeah, and that's so the right way to do things, isn't it? Through relationships like that. So you are so known for being, and it's so apparent about your honesty, and this is what it is. This is who I am. Is it getting harder to be totally honest because you're dealing with a larger concern and the way you are out there in the public, and I know you're on the road a lot in the course of a year. Is it become harder, or is it still easy to be totally honest and be on the street?
I think in some ways it's harder. Like, even realizing I feel like I wrote more and maybe with more vulnerability a few years back. And so some of even journeying through this writing was trying to get to the bottom of that and look through that. But some of it in a way that isn't about writing or writing a book. I think that when we struggle, I'm someone who struggles with depression, we buy into this idea that we don't want to be a broken record. We don't want to keep struggling in the same way, saying the same things. We don't want people to be concerned. We feel like, maybe a few years ago I said these things for the first time, and there's the hesitation to say that I'm still there or I'm struggling with some of those things. And so I think that's been a challenge. But even lately, saying that out loud feels important because I think other people relate.
Right.
Yeah.
But all the things, what takes down to helping someone, and it's helping ourselves, But I love all the words that come into play when we talk about these things like honesty, love, gratitude, grace, tolerance, acceptance. All of these things sort of relate to faith. But what I love about your whole organization is it's non-denominational. It doesn't matter what your beliefs are, that we're all accepting no matter what. So I think that's been part of what you guys put across with all of this too.
Yeah, thank you. We wanted to create something inviting for people, no matter what they believe, no matter where they live, what they look like, how they dress, who they love. We knew we'd have to choose our battles, and we're trying to bring a message of hope and help to people who struggle, period. And we don't want to put walls up around it or hurdles or do anything that pushes people away.
So the movie, tell us about the movie. How did that come about? And because I think it's really cool. And having someone play you, and you can say this is all based on truth, which it is. So it's not really a documentary, but it's like a docudrama or whatever you want to call it, whatever genre we can put this in. But what was it like, and how involved were you with the movie?
It was. Some friends, we joke that the movie about the movie, like the behind the scenes, would be more interesting because it's just been a total roller coaster.
Right.
And the movie was filmed about 4 years ago in Orlando, which we love. It was filmed at times blocks from where these things really took place, these events. My friend David McKenna, who I mentioned, he's really the guy who had the idea and basing it on Renee's life. My friend Renee, her life story. And so this thing was going to happen. This film was going to be made in a way with or without us, with or without me, the organization. And we were invited to get involved and got to speak into it as an organization. I did individually. I got to work as a script consultant. So I didn't have complete control or anything like that. Right. But certainly got to be part of the process. Our real life interns play the interns in the film. The stuff you see on the walls at the office is from our real office at the time. Yeah. I was supposed to be on set for one day. I had a trip planned to Australia, and I got so sucked in. I just fell in love with it and canceled my trip and was there for 5 weeks. It was like being at camp, like just rooting for people, and it was so special. And it's funny because it's fun to ask the question, who would play you in a movie? And we think that would be so enjoyable. And it's interesting because when it's you, someone pretending to be you, you're going to have opinions. You go, oh, would I wear that? Would I say that? But in the end, we're happy with it. We're happy. I'm happy that because some people waited 4 years for this thing because it really was done for a while. We didn't know how or where it was going to come out, and finally Sony wanted it, and they made that deal, and thankfully Sony released the film. And it's cool because we have people that waited 4 years and other people that this film was their introduction to the whole thing. Yeah. And so, kind of both ends of the spectrum. Yeah. But in the end, I think like everything we do, the hope is it starts conversations, gets people talking, can provide encouragement, and certainly hope it introduces some folks to the work that we're doing.
Yeah. You still live where you grew up in Melbourne, Florida. What is it like to now have your whole everything you created in where you grew up and still being there with family and everything? Because I grew up, where I'm still living, where I grew up, but there's so many rewards to that in doing what you do in the community in which you love. So tell us a little bit about that.
So I have a funny relationship with home. Like I wish I kind of had this, oh, it's great, it's perfect, I'm never going to leave. But the reality is I'm pretty restless. But there's a lot, regardless, like I get to travel a lot, and I think that's healthy for me. There's just things missing for me at home. I'm a single guy. It's the small town I grew up in. But my nephews are there, my parents, my sister. Sure. It's home. It's been home for such a big part of my life. And I think the thing that does feel healthy, and there's a sense of pride, is to say not everything meaningful in the world or in America is happening in 3 cities. To say you can be somewhere else and do something great. You can be somewhere else and do something that makes a difference. And that there is a sense of pride about that. And that to me it's not specific to Melbourne, Florida, but my hope is that's inspiring to a young person in any small place.
Yeah. You mentioned your own depression. Is that easy to talk about, or is it something that you really need to talk about? I mean, does it come easy for you to talk about those things?
That's become easy. I think there's 2 parts to it, because it's easy for me to say that I struggle and say that I've had to go to counseling, that I take antidepressants. In the context of an event or an interview, it's not the place for me to unpack all of it.
Right.
So that's another thing. I think that there's a place for having coffee with a friend, sitting across from a counselor. But I think so much, our biggest enemy, because when there's a cause or a solution, a lot of times there's an enemy, and for us, we're unique because there's not this people group that we're fighting, it's really the stigma that we're fighting. We're fighting the idea that you can't talk about these things. And I've gotten really comfortable realizing that that's based on lies. And so it actually has become easy. I know it's not easy for everyone, maybe not even the average person, but I also know that if I can take the lead and say, hey, this is just part of being alive. You can be real about it. Here's me being real about it. If that can help other people do the same, that feels good.
Sure. I love in the back of the book all the lists of resources you put in the back. There's some great ones in there. But how would you tell someone to get involved with with your organization, and what can they do, or even in their own lives or helping their own friends? What do you suggest that people should do?
So the first thing that comes to mind, there's a section of our website, the Get Involved section of our website
Right.
that's dedicated to that. And I love to tell people it can be as small as buying a t-shirt, or I guess now a book, or as big as moving to Florida and joining our team. You know, becoming an intern, it's become one of my favorite parts of
that's
what we
so
do.
cool. You
yeah,
do that.
I mean, right before I left, I met 9 new folks. They typically are college age or just out of college, and they came from as far away as Perth, Australia.
Wow.
And we get folks from all over. And you know, so there's all sorts of ways to plug into the organization. There's student-led chapters on college campuses. We have a street team where people can kind of echo whatever it is that we're talking about, different campaigns they can participate in. But I think I love to remind people that at the end of the day, it's not about this organization. We hope we can be a tool that helps people help the people around them.
Right.
You know, I think it starts with if you're concerned about someone and they're struggling, what does it look like to learn as much as you can about what they're struggling with? You know, how do you love someone who lives in a place you've never been? And so just learning to do that homework and being willing to say, hey, I need to learn about depression. I need to learn about addiction. And we hope we can provide some tools. But at the end of the day, it's really trying to direct people back to their communities to care for the people they're connected to.
And maybe to be more aware.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We have a friend, he's a counselor that we work with, and because raising awareness is a catchphrase in nonprofit world, and we sort of push back at it. Like, I don't love that phrase. I feel like it gets thrown around without thinking. And my friend says, we're not raising awareness about these issues, we're trying to make people aware of people and the real struggles and questions that people live with.
So what do you keep sort of front of mind when you're thinking about what you do, but also what you do in your own life? What is that phrase or that whatever it is, that mantra that you keep front of mind for you, and something that maybe you can share with us that we should be keeping more front of mind?
Yeah.
You know?
I mean, I'll share, this is one thing that comes to mind. I meet people who say they're still alive because of this work that we do. That light bulb went off, maybe it was something they read, something they heard, something they found on our website, and it made them want to keep going, it made them want to stay on this planet, and it maybe made them want to get help. And so that's the motivator. And the reality is we also see the other side. We meet a mother who has lost a son to suicide, or her husband to addiction. So both have a way of reminding you what's at stake. But I think the starting point is this honesty, this culture of honest relationships, honest conversations, and that applies to the work, but that applies to my own life and struggles as well.
You have a disclaimer at the end of the book, and you said that you don't want to impress people with your stories or your writing or your friends, but you want the readers to tell their stories and encourage them to tell their stories and to tell the story of one's life, because all of our stories are important. So I thought that disclaimer you had at the book was a perfect way to end it.
Oh,
so,
thank you.
So what do you hope readers will take away from If You Feel Too Much? I mean, when they look at they don't know anything about anything else you've done.
Yeah.
And they pick up this book. What do you hope they'll take away?
I hope people feel less alone. I hope people feel encouraged. I hope they feel invited or inspired to be honest. If people are thinking about writing, or maybe it's, should I keep writing? I hope they, in whatever way they feel led to tell their stories, and again, whether that's in the form of sitting down at a computer, maybe that's in the form of a book, but beyond all that, to the idea that, hey, you matter, the people in your life matter, your struggles, your dreams. Do you get to be honest about those things, because you deserve that?
So I know this is not going to be your last book. So anything you can share with us, or anything that you hope to write in the future, or maybe even are working on?
Yeah, not working on. I'm definitely committed.
Right.
Like I joke. They say about tattoos, if you get one, you'll want to get more. And I don't have any, but that always comes to mind.
Right.
I feel like for so many years I've wrestled with, am I a writer? Can I say that? And in a way, I think this gives me permission to realize I think I'm supposed to do this. That it's been so special to walk through the process, to see what the book is meaning to people, and to know, hey, I want to keep doing this.
Yeah.
And I want to keep telling stories. I don't know what the next one will be exactly, but I want to keep telling stories. I want to be honest, and I want to share things about my life and the stories I get to bump into. And it's a privilege. It's such an honor to get to do that.
Well, Jamie, thanks so much for talking with me, and congratulations on If You Feel Too Much.
Thank you. This was great.
What a great conversation about getting involved and being honest and helping people in need. It's Jamie Tworkowski's book, If You Feel Too Much. Thanks for joining me on Authors Revealed.